Alright, so here's the last video showing how to complete the installation of the front suspension kit for the RC128 or RC28 associated cars and trucks. So by now, if you've been following along and you're building your own, you've got one setup that looks like this. This is the complete front suspension ready to bolt onto the car. So let me show you a couple things first on a chassis here. I bought a spare chassis at some point when I was trying to figure some things out, but I think it's going to be helpful to look at this just to see how things go together, and then we'll move on to putting this on an actual car. So if you look at the chassis and you look at these areas right here and here, you can see there's these little grooves in here. So these actually locate the front suspension bulkhead. It's the same on the stock bulkhead that you're going to take off, and it's the same on this kit here that I've come out with. So you can see there's these couple of rib features. There's one here and there's one here. So those are actually going to sit down when you assemble it into those corresponding little grooves on the chassis. So it's going to sit about like that, and you can see how when it's sitting down in there properly, it's kind of locating it so it can't really move around. Okay, and then when the top of the chassis goes on, it kind of gets sandwiched in there, and then by the time you've got the screws and everything in, it locks everything together real solid. Okay, so just wanted to let you guys see what that actually looks like, because the way I'm going to have you assemble this, you don't remove the top of the chassis completely. You can optionally. I don't do it. It's up to you. It's only a couple more screws, but honestly I find it easier to just kind of peel the top of this thing back and put it together. But again, that's up to you. The other thing I want to point out is, and it's going to be hard to see because we're not going to, again, remove the top of the chassis all the way on the complete car, is how the little steering rack goes in here. So this is what the steering rack looks like. Again, I've got a spare one of these that I bought at some point, and you can see that the steering rack rides on this little thing here. There's this little nub that sticks up here that the groove in the steering rack actually is going to slide back and forth on. So you see it's going to sit in there about like that, and that allows it to move back and forth. Now what holds the steering rack in place is when you put the front suspension on, is on the back of the bulkhead. So you remember that's this side here that's got this little triangular piece on it. You can see it right here. Is that actually goes when the front suspension, the bulkhead's located in the correct place, it actually holds this thing down like this. And so you can see how, I think you can see anyway, it kind of partially covers that and allows it to continue to slide back and forth, but it's not going to allow it to escape. So when the whole thing is assembled correctly, it's going to be, the steering rack is going to be kind of sandwiched between the chassis on the bottom and that little triangular piece on the front suspension. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense, because again, when we go to assemble this onto a car, you're not going to be able to see it as well as you can on these chassis pieces. So let's put those aside. Put that aside. And so here's the car I'm going to put it on. This is actually, again, this is an Exceed car. This is the one that looks like this, but again, it's literally the exact same car other than the body looking a little different, and of course the wheels being different. I still have no idea why they put slick tires on a buggy, but that's another story. So anyway, what we're going to do here is we're going to remove 6 screws. We're going to remove these 2 right here, 1, 2. We're going to remove 2 here, 1 on each side, 1, 2. And then on the underside of the chassis, we're going to remove 2 here. So 1, 2. So let me pause this for a second and I'll remove those, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so here we go. So all 6 of those screws are pulled out already. You want to make sure you don't lose those screws, because you're actually going to use all of them again when you reassemble this thing. So now that those screws are out, the front bumper should basically just pull right out. It's just kind of sandwiched in there. Once the screws come out, there's nothing holding it in. So we'll set that aside. We're going to reuse it. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of gently lift the front part of the chassis. Again, it's still screwed on in the middle and in the back one here. But what we can do is we can kind of separate it like you see here. And then at that point, this whole front suspension, including the steering rack and everything, is going to just lift right out. Okay, so what we're going to do now is set the chassis aside, and this is where we're going to sort of rob the parts off this thing here that we're going to then transfer to the new front suspension kit. So the wheels are just mounted on here with these little shiny pins that you can see here. They're just basically a press fit into the wheel. So what you're going to do is grab a hold of the front suspension right here and just pull. You may have to pull kind of hard. I've had these apart, so maybe they're a little easier. It may take some force, but you're going to pull that out, set it aside, and then likewise on the other side, grab a hold of the suspension right here and just pull straight out. It should come off without too much drama. Set those aside. Okay, so now you should have something that looks like this. All right, so now what you have to do is you have to press out these two pins here. So there's one here, there's one here, and there's one here that these steering blocks rotate on. Okay, so what I like to do here is take the new front suspension and face it facing forward, so the front of the car would be this way, and then take the old one and face it the same way, because once these things come off, it can get a little confusing to reorient it. So to make my life easy, I just try and take it off and then transfer it directly over without moving anything around. So kind of like the pins, and they're actually the exact same pins that hold the wheels on, that hold on these steering pivots here. So what you can do is you can turn the thing upside down, and you can see that the pin is sticking out a little bit. So take the end of a screwdriver or something, don't stab yourself if you're doing this, and just push on this. It shouldn't take too much force, and you can see how it sort of worked its way out a little bit. So go ahead and grab it with your fingernails or a little pair of needle nose pliers or whatever, and set it aside. Okay, and then likewise we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So again, just press it out from the bottom until you can grab it from the top and put it by that side of the suspension. So now here's what I like to do, again, just not to get things mixed up, is just take this and transfer it directly over here, facing the exact same direction, like that. See that? Just move it from here to there. Trust me, because if you get this thing all cattywampus, it may take a while to figure out which way everything faces. You'd think it would be obvious, but for me at least, it got me kind of confused a few times. So we are done with this thing now, the stock bulkhead. You can set it aside. So now what you're going to do is you're basically just going to reassemble this in the same way back onto the new front suspension. So I'll start with the right side here. And what you're going to do is, if you've properly reamed out these holes like I showed you, you just slip this into here, pretty much exactly like it came off the old one. Drop the pin in. You may have to wiggle things around a little bit to get it aligned. And then just apply a little force here with your thumb or whatever. And there you go. Okay, now likewise we'll swing this other side around here and we'll get it lined up like that, axle facing out. We'll take the pin, drop it in there, get things lined up, and then again, if you've reamed everything like I showed you in the other video, you should be able to apply a little force here and get that thing to pop in there. Okay, so there you go. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so now what you're going to do is you can take this and you can either pop the wheels on it now, or you can leave that for later. Let's just go ahead and put it on now. So what you need to do is you need to take something to hold the back of this. Like, you can use your thumb the way I've got it in here to hold it from sliding backwards, and then just put that onto the inside of the wheel, and again just push it right in there. You can take a tool of some sort and push on it. It should go into a certain point and then stop, and the wheel should still spin freely. And then you're going to do the exact same thing to the other side. Just turn it around here so you can kind of back it up with your thumb. Put the axle on there, slide it in. If you need to, take a tool, screwdriver, whatever, and push it in until it stops. So there you go. Okay, so this is what it should look like now, as far as being assembled and pretty much ready to go back on the car. Okay, so what I failed to mention earlier is before you take your car apart, what you want to do is you actually want to turn the steering all the way to the left. So turn the car on, turn the remote control on. You're going to take your remote and you're going to turn all the way to the left, and then while holding that to the left, shut off the car and shut off the remote. The order doesn't matter, but what you want to do is, and if you forgot to do that, if you're following along this in real time, when you do it, you can turn the car on now and still turn all the way to the left, and then shut the car and the controller off. Now the reason that's important is it's going to make your life easier to assemble this if this little steering horn off the servo that you see is sticking off to the side here. Okay, so what we got to do now is kind of the reverse order of what we did before. Is we want to sort of peel this back, take the front suspension and finagle its way in here, and then this is where you're gonna get the steering rack onto that little pin that it slides on, and at the same time you need to get the little servo horn into the little groove that it slides on. So this bit can be a little bit tricky, but once you get it, it should more or less drop right in. This is where having the top of the chassis off might be a little bit easier, but for whatever reason I've always just done it with the chassis on. So it may take a little finagling to get it, but you'll get it. And you'll know when everything's in the right place, because since we had the steering turned all the way to the left, you'll see the steering is pointed to the left like this. And again, I'm just holding a little pressure here on the chassis to hold things together. I don't have any screws in, but you can kind of tell that those little tabs on the bottom of the bulkhead are in the little grooves on the bottom of the chassis, and that's why things seem real solid. So when you get it in the right place, you'll be able to tell. It'll be real obvious. The wheels will be pointing like they should. You won't be able to really manually steer it much, because you've got the servo horn into there. The little steering rack is on the little pin. The bulkhead is holding the steering rack down, and then likewise, like I mentioned earlier, those little slots on the chassis are lined up with the little protrusions on the bottom of the bulkhead. So keep holding this thing together with your fingers, and now basically what you're just going to do is start taking some screws and putting this thing back together. I like to start with these top ones here. Don't get too crazy tightening them up, you're just tightening into plastic. So let me pause for a second and put these 6 screws back in. Alright, so here we go. We got all the screws back in, all 6, including the ones that hold the bumper in. We put the bumper back on, and that's pretty much it. You're ready to go now. So just go ahead, before you get too far, check and make sure that your steering still works and is steering freely as it should. Make sure the suspension is cycling like it should. So there you go. That's it. That completes putting this thing together. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Let me know if anyone has any questions. I see a couple people have already ordered these sets, so thank you to those of you that did that already. I'm gonna get together some information here pretty soon on the hardware kit that I talked about. That'll have all the different screws and collars that you'll need to put this kit together. And likewise, I think I also said I would list what the screws are in one of the videos. So I'll put those too in case somebody wants to source their own screws. But other than that, that's it. So go have fun and enjoy having a really cool car that's even cooler now, because it has some actual front suspension on it here. And thanks.